Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
Wall Street analysts have coined a new term called the taco trade. They're saying Trump always chickens out on your tariff threats, and that's why markets are higher this week. What's your response to that?
I kick out?
Chicken out.
Oh, then I chicken out. I've never heard that. You mean because I reduced China from 145% that I set down to 100 and then down to another number because I gave the European Union a 50% tax tariff, and they called up and they said, please, let's meet right now. We had a country people didn't think it was going to survive, and you ask a nasty question like that.
All right, so that clip, that was Trump being asked by a reporter about the taco trade, which means Trump always chickens out. And if I remember correctly, a few weeks back on our podcast, maybe even a couple of times, I said Wall Street's getting hip to this dude. And that's why you're not seeing any more of these wild fluctuations to the degree that we did when the market was really melting down. And so a reporter asked him about it. And, you know, he's so thin-skinned. For someone who really aspires to be an Erdogan or a Orban or a strong man like Kim Jong-un and Putin, he is so publicly weak and baby thin-skinned and cowardly that he has to lash out at this reporter. And he, of course, got nasty himself, but it's really telling, you know, it's really telling when he responds like that.
I think the entire MAGA movement are incredible snowflakes. If we remember back during the campaign, when they were called weird and they melted down, then all of them, like Stephen Miller went ballistic. They actually can't take anything because every accusation is a confession, and they accuse us of being snowflakes, and literally they are more snowflakey than anybody.
It's so true. And when you think about it, we're talking about the president of the United States, who arguably is the most powerful and feared. And that's not a pejorative term. That's just no matter who's in the office, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, the United States president, for the most part, throughout the world, is considered the most feared person because they have the most power and the most mighty military. I mean, he's commander in chief of the strongest military in the world. And when you think about how is this man going to truly defend and protect us against our most brutal enemies when he can't even take a question from a reporter about a taco trade?
It has led to some really great memes, I have to admit, on the internet. There's been some great taco stuff.
Like him in the chicken suits are the best. By the way, I got to say, our good pal Jen Hammoud is not here today. She is at a wedding, and she is sorely missed. So I hope she's having fun, and she'll join us next week. But, you know, for me, I don't know whether I like this whole taco trade more because it truly illustrates his cowardice or because tacos are Mexican.
Oh, it's golden. I mean, I think it was a Financial Times reporter who coined the phrase, and he had no idea it was going to go viral like this. But it's also true because apparently I think he's made almost 50 changes to the tariffs since April 2nd. And with all of those changes, there's not actually a single deal signed. Not one deal has been actually signed.
No, and the breaking news this morning is that Trump posted that the negotiations with China, they're kind of falling apart. No, there's no deals. We have these pauses, but what happens during the pauses? We have nothing except chaos and tremendous uncertainty in the economy on the corporate level, right down to the small business level. And it is so confusing, all these court rulings and everything. But when I saw the original injunction slapped on Trump on Wednesday, halting these tariffs, I just thought, like, psychologically, this is going to send him into an emotional tailspin.
Unfortunately, the appellate court gave him a little reprieve on this, but most people who study this think that it's so unconstitutional. It's enumerated in the Constitution that the Congress has the right to do tariffs, and nothing about the president. He's using this in completely the wrong ways. It's so obviously illegal, but it takes so long for the courts to actually come to a decision.
Well, there's a lot of legal cases, so many plan Bs Like if they lose on the
Mhm.
Alien Enemies Act, they can go to the Trade Act of 1974. They're just going to keep throwing shit up on the wall,
Mhm.
and hopefully some of it sticks. Or, like with everything else with Trump, they hope that it just exhausts everybody. It exhausts the judicial system. It exhausts us. It exhausts the plaintiffs in particular because they have to pony up the money to keep these cases going. And that's not inexpensive. And so that's how guys like him often win in the end. They just exhaust the system because they have the money and the power. He's using the money and the power of the U.S. government. Think about that. Our taxpayer dollars are funding these attacks on the rule of law, on due process, and the Constitution itself. So let's talk about your favorite subject, Elon Musk. There's going to be a press conference today at 1:30 with Trump and Musk. I don't know if this is going to be like, the big send off, but it's something I really can't wait for because between those two, it's like watching Abbott and Costello. I just aged myself.
Maybe it'll be another Tesla commercial.
Tesla. You know, it's only, what is it? It's 4 months that Musk has been in government and he's already leaving and it hasn't gone well for him. When you look at the damage to his personal brand, going from like the boy wonder, genius and innovator to one of the most hated people in the world. And then you look at his, personal fortune, which at least for a while was cut in half because it's mostly tied to his Tesla stock, but more so the Tesla brand itself. I mean, sales in Europe have just been eviscerated. It's not been a good ride for him. And it wasn't a wise decision for Trump to bring him on because, like you said about tariffs, what does Doge have to show for anything? I mean, they came in boasting of a $2 trillion cut to federal spending. That was quickly lowered to 1 trillion. Now, I think the estimates are around 170 million, but there's a question about the accuracy of that reporting, as well as contracts that were due to expire originally under the Biden administration. So, in the end, and this is not to say $170 million, it's a small amount of money, but was the chaos of the first quarter worth that, especially when most of the cuts perhaps are in areas like USAID, which has not made America healthier, stronger, safer here or abroad. And so I think when the history books are written on this chapter of Trump 2.0, I think for Trump and Musk, it's not going to be a pretty picture.
Yeah, I would push back just a little bit because I don't think the intention was ever to actually save money. It was more just smokescreen because what the conservative members of Congress have wanted to do forever is to eviscerate the administrative state. And what Musk did with Doge is effectively do a lot of that and act as a heat shield to protect them from being the ones that are really attacked. Everyone can attack Doge, they can destroy Tesla, or they can do whatever. But basically, Trump and everyone else is like, oh, well, that's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. They're saving money, but it's not me. I didn't vote for this. And they've never been able to get the votes. So this is a way, not legally, but to get around the fact that they could never have the votes to do what they really wanted to do.
I think that's part of it. But again, at the end of the day, there really weren't major cuts. There have been court rulings, pushing back and halting a lot of the spending cuts and compare it to the real personal humiliation. Let's talk about Wisconsin, all the money he spent. He's going to go in there and put a cheese head on, and Wisconsinites are going to be like, oh, Mr. Musk, yes, just tell us what to do on election day. He was run out of town, wasted so much money and time. And so I just think the net effect of it all, the bottom line, like if we look at it from that perspective, I think this was a huge loss for him. And, he's a narcissist, right? Just like Trump. He got drunk on the attention, that wearing the hats, the chainsaw, the crowds, going on stage like a rock star. And he went off the rails. And so I think his exit is around the time I thought he would always. I mean, we've had people on this podcast who were saying like, oh, he'll be around a year from now. He's not going anywhere. It just struck me as how could these two chaotic narcissists, A, coexist for any length of time, and B, actually accomplish anything. So it's no surprise to me. I'm happy to see him go. I think there's going to be some serious lasting damage. USAID, for example, it's going to take a long time to try to even get back to any semblance of normalcy there. But just what it did to the very fabric of our country and the cruelty with which Doge and Musk tried to implement what they were doing.
No question. It's terrible what they did. I had to paraphrase Bill Gates. It's not a good look when the world's richest man is killing the world's poorest children.
Yeah. Well, that's one chapter of Trump 2.0 that's over. Hopefully, in the next 3 months, there'll be other chapters that end because it's been nothing but disaster and chaos. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner today is that wonderful CNBC reporter Megan Casella for asking Trump the taco question. My loser, unfortunately, are the 500,000 people who are now facing a dire humanitarian crisis when SCOTUS revoked the Biden-era humanitarian program intended to give temporary residency.
My winner, Harvard President Alan Garber, for his continued courage in standing up to Donald Trump's tyranny. My loser, no surprise, Elon Musk, whose disastrous tenure in government has ended in abject political and financial failure and personal humiliation. All right, let's get to the weekly rant. As hard as it is to imagine this right now, Donald Trump at some point will no longer be president. His reign of autocratic craziness will be over. But in his wake, he will leave an America whose legacy to the rest of the world will be one of ignorance, lies, hate, racism, cruelty, and corruption. Trump is the first president in U.S. history to actively promote stupidity as he wages war on education and science. From his attempts to dismantle the Department of Education to his appointment of conspiracy quack Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. Remember, this is a president who once boasted, "I love the uneducated." Trump is also the first president in U.S. history to mercilessly attack truth, facts, and reality. Together with his right-wing media ecosystem, he has turned the White House into a propaganda machine. Americans and our friends abroad can no longer trust anything he and his administration says or does. Trump is also the first president in U.S. history to blatantly and shamelessly engage in transphobic, xenophobic, and racist rhetoric and policymaking. A president who admires Adolf Hitler, dines with white nationalists, and was endorsed by the KKK. Trump is also the first president in U.S. history with an unconscionable lack of humanity, someone believed by many to be a sociopath who gets a raging hard-on by being cruel, sadistic, and unapologetically heartless. Trump is also the first president in U.S. history who is a convicted felon and who openly engages in corrupt, pay-for-play transgressions. His presidency is a non-stop masterclass in grifting. Trump is also the first president in U.S. history to fill his administration with convicted felons, sexual abusers, and ethically and morally reprehensible cretins. Trump is also the first president in U.S. history to pardon violent, fraudulent, and/or tax-evading criminals based solely on whether they're loyal to him or not. Trump is also the first president in U.S. history to wage war on our independent judiciary, attacking individual judges, threatening them with impeachment or even arrest, and defying court orders. And lastly, Trump is the first president in U.S. history to attack our Democratic allies with draconian tariffs, trade wars, and faux strongman rhetoric, while sucking up to and empowering our most brutal enemies. So the ultimate question is whether the next administration, hopefully one led by a Democratic president, will be able to undo most of the egregious harm and damage created by this Constitution-raping criminal enterprise and restore America's honor and integrity in an effort to earn back the world's trust and respect. Let's hope so, though I'm not so sure. All right, let's get to Elie Honig. He's an attorney and CNN senior legal analyst and the best-selling author of Hatchet Man and last year's Untouchable, How Powerful People Get Away With It. He's a former assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of New York. He also hosts podcasts, writes for Cafe, Vox Media, and writes a weekly column for New York Magazine. Elie, welcome back into the back room.
Always glad to be with you, Andy. I realize that my backdrop here is my TV studio. You can see that if crazy breaking news happens, that is like my suit ready to go. So I can get that thing all. I can go from like being outside to on that camera in about 90 seconds.
Awesome. And there actually is breaking news, which I want to get to in a second. But first,
are the tariffs back on or off now?
It's not about tariffs. It's the other craziness. But I just want to first say that about a month ago, I saw the segment you did about Dr. Elie Honig.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
It was really moving. And
Thank
if you
you.
want to just speak to that for a minute or two, I'd love that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up, Andy. So this was an unbelievable coincidence. So I get these emails all the time. People see me on CNN and go, "Oh, my name is Alexander Honig. I live in Wichita, Kansas. Might we be cousins or whatever?" Which is always nice. I always say, we're not, but great to hear from you. And we Honigs hang together. So I get an email about a year ago from a guy who says, "Hi, my name's Elie Honig also." And I was like, whoa, I had no idea. Turns out this is the original Dr. Elie Honig. He was he's 82 years old. When his mother was pregnant with him in France, a Jewish family, in 1942, the Nazis took over and overran the town, deported the other Dr. Honig's father and 9 of his relatives, murdered them at Auschwitz. And he was saved, though. His mother was 5 months pregnant with him, and his non-Jewish, his Christian French neighbors vowed, we are not letting the Nazis take this pregnant woman and her soon to be born baby. And he had 2 older sisters. And so for 2 years, they hid him and his mother and his sisters, who were 5 or 6 years old. They gave him a fake French identity. They moved him around from one orphanage to what are they called, where they have nuns? What's the word?
The rectory or
something like that, church places. And
I'll edit this out, but 2 Jews talking about church places.
No, you can leave it. But they rescued him, and that's actually part of the story. The fact that these non-Jews risked their own lives. I mean, it wasn't just an act of generosity. It was an act of incredible courage. I mean, I asked him in the interview, what would have happened if they were caught by the Nazis? He said they would have been murdered. I mean, and I did some research suggested they would have been tortured. It would have been horrible. And these brave, it was really a small group of almost all women who saved him. And here he is 82 years later. And he has lived this long, beautiful life. He has 4 children, 5 grandchildren. He was a beloved physics professor, hence Dr. Honig at University of Toronto. And he's this lovely man. So I interviewed him and we sort of bonded. I have family Holocaust history. My grandparents were survivors of the Holocaust and they lost their whole families. So I did an interview with him and sort of took a walk with him and met his family. And we did this piece. You can find it on the internet if you just Google Elie Honig, Holocaust survivor, whatever. So thank you. I'm glad you watched that. We got tremendous. My favorite responses, by the way, were, we got 1 million social media responses in the comments, and a lot of we got a good number of people saying, "Oh my gosh, he was my physics professor at U Toronto. We loved him. He made such a difference." So yeah, it was great.
It's just a truly incredible story. People should watch it. So let's get to the breaking news. I don't even know if you had a chance to see this because it literally flashed on the tube like 15 minutes ago.
What happened?
The Supreme Court is allowing Trump to end deportation protections for about 500,000 immigrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. And also interesting, the only 2 dissenting justices were Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor.
So Kagan was with the others then.
Yeah. And so this is pending appeal.
Well, if the Supreme Court just ruled, or was this temporary?
It's temporary, yeah.
Let me just I'll talk generally about this. There's so many of these immigration appeals. The core questions are, first of all, is this the kind of thing that the courts can even review presidential action on? This is a big talking point, a bullshit talking point that Stephen Miller likes to say, which is the courts should have no say in what the president does on immigration and foreign policy. There are certain very narrow areas where that is true, where Congress has passed a law saying, this is not for the courts. This is entirely for the president. Where that happens, Trump wins. There was a ruling 2 weeks ago that Trump won 8-1. He had everyone but Jackson. He had Sotomayor and Kagan with him. But that doesn't mean that's the case for all of immigration law in general. In fact, the courts do have a role in reviewing the way Trump has invoked immigration law. So that's always question number 1. And then question number 2 is, if the courts do have their say, well, is Trump within his lane or not? And one of the things I've written, Andy, and talked about is, and this relates to tariffs as well. I wrote a piece for New York Magazine 2-3 weeks ago where I said, the Trump administration has this tendency to call everything an emergency, a rebellion, an invasion, an incursion. Like, what's with all this crying wolf? First of all, it's kind of chicken shit, right? Like, for an administration that prides itself on manly stoicism, everything's an emergency. Right. I said, but also it's not working in the courts. Like, the courts aren't buying that the tariff situation is an emergency. And that's the ruling right now, even though the tariffs are allowed to stand for the moment. Or that having, Venezuelan gangs here is certainly bad and alarming, but it's not an invasion by a foreign country as the law means it.
Yeah, what's interesting to me, at the same time he's in court saying that he needs to invoke all these laws because of invasions and the type of national emergencies you just mentioned, he is also out at rallies and giving speeches saying that there's only been like 3 people in the last couple of months that have gotten through. 99.999% have. So those are two inherently conflicting statements. It's either an invasion or you shut the border. It
Right.
can't be both.
I think he would say it is an invasion. Only I am protecting you from falling victim to those invaders. Yeah, no, you're right. And look, even when it comes to emergency protections, we've heard this talk from Stephen Miller and others. Oh, we might suspend habeas corpus because we're in a time of emergency. It's like, well, why have you not done it yet then? If we're in such dire emergency, it's almost June. Like if it was a real emergency, you would have, if it was a habeas suspending emergency along the lines of when we've done it previously, Civil War, Reconstruction, Pearl Harbor, you probably would have done it in January, not now. So look, I don't think anyone genuinely feels these are invasions or emergencies or rebellions or what have you as the law provides. I know there's the talking point of, oh, the way these gangs have infiltrated. But there's a difference between something's a really bad situation, something's a major problem on the one hand, and it's a rebellion or an invasion on the other.
Right. So you mentioned tariffs. Let's talk about that. And let's start with a basic civics course.
Right.
What does the Constitution say about where the authority lies with implementing tariffs?
It lies in Congress. Okay, so Congress has the power to levy tariffs. However, Congress also can pass laws delegating some of that authority to the executive branch, to the president, which Congress has done in this law called IEPA. Not the best acronym ever, but it means the internet. I always have to slow down here. International Economic Emergency Powers Act. And this gets back to the point we were talking about, which says if the president declares we are in an international economic emergency, then he can take certain measures, although it doesn't even actually say the word tariffs, and that comes into play in a minute. So Trump, of course, says emergency, trade deficit, something we've had for which are not inherently bad or evil. I mean, everyone has if there's a country that has coffee beans and we buy $5 million worth of coffee beans from them and they don't buy anything from us, that's a $5 million trade deficit. But guess what? We're getting the coffee. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But he says, well, we have trade deficits, which we've had I understand, for 49 years running. So I don't know why it's an emergency now. And therefore, it's an emergency. Now, let me sort of walk through the decisions because it's confusing. There are 2 separate lawsuits where we got rulings very quickly. The big one is in this court called the Court of International Trade. And I know it sounds like one of these UN things that's not binding. It's a real actual federal court that has Title III, Article 3 jurisdiction, and that makes binding decisions. So they decided in a 3-0 opinion, including judges who were nominated by Presidents Reagan, Obama, and Trump, won. 3-0, they said, this is not an emergency. This is not an economic emergency. Tariff struck down. However, 24 hours or so later, the next level up Court of Appeals said they didn't rule on it, but they said that's on hold. That ruling's on hold, meaning the tariffs as of this moment, Andy, you and I are speaking on Friday mid-morning, still stand. There's a separate case, a separate group of challengers, toy manufacturers who import products from Asia, also challenged it, but they went to the regular federal court in D.C. The Trump administration actually argued the case should have been kicked over to that Court of International Trade, but the judge didn't do it. So that judge also rejected Trump's actions, but on a slightly different basis. He said that law, the IEPA, International Emergency Powers Act, does not even apply to tariffs. It doesn't give the president tariff power at all. So Trump isn't this the Trumpiest thing ever? He's lost 2 rulings as of this moment on slightly different bases, yet his tariffs as of this moment still stand anyway. Oh, and I should say the second one, because that judge said, I'm going to put my own ruling on pause for 14 days as it works its way through the appeal. So he's 0 for 2, but the tariffs still stand.
And it wasn't that all of the tariffs were halted. So which are still standing?
So the ones that are still standing are the product-based tariffs on aluminum and steel and autos and auto parts. All the country-based ones that he announced, some of them on January 20th when he took over, and some of them on Liberation Day, April 2nd, those are all the ones that are in flux now.
Okay, so this whole tariff situation, politically, financially, economically, it's a freaking roller coaster. So
Yeah.
for the non-lawyers out there, help us understand this appeals court pause. What
Right.
exactly happens now that there's a pause on the original lower court ruling?
Yeah. So the tariffs are in effect for the time being until some other higher court stops it or reverses it. So basically, what the appeals court has said is, hold on, we're going to put the district court ruling striking down the tariffs. We're putting that on hold pending whatever the outcome is on appeal. Now, watch for this, though. Ordinarily, a case has to go from the trial level court to the Court of Appeals and then maybe to the U.S. Supreme Court. Trump tweeted or True Social this morning, oh, we're going right to the Supreme Court. Now, he's done that before, but there is a way to ask the Supreme Court to skip that mid-level and to just go right from the trial court right up to the Supreme Court. Honestly, I think they should do that. I think the Supreme Court needs to do that here. There's too much at stake. Our entire economy, our foreign policy, our domestic policy. How can we not know? I mean, talk to anyone. I when I host on radio on Sirius XM, I had a day where I said, if you're a small business owner when tariffs were first happening, like call in. And the constant theme was whether we love tariffs or hate it, want them or don't want them, we can't invest in anything because we don't know. We can't. How am I going to build out my shop if I have no idea what's going to happen? And so I think the Supreme Court, the other thing is, we could end up with contradictory rulings. We talked about there's two cases. You could have that federal circuit say tariffs illegal, and you could have the DC circuit saying they're perfectly fine. Then what the hell do we do? So like, I think the Supreme Court needs to jump into this ASAP, and otherwise we're just going to have utter chaos legally and in our markets.
Well, that's a really good point because it was chaotic before the courts got involved here. And now it just seems like the courts have, in a sense, muddied up the waters.
Yeah.
Because between the courts and then the Trump administration, there's so much uncertainty that is now, like you say, trickling down to the corporate and small business level, and people can't make inventory decisions, the hiring decisions. And so isn't the Constitution really clear, though? Like, even if it gets to the Supreme Court, isn't this just a pretty black and white ruling? Or is there wiggle room for them to give him what he wants?
No, there's wiggle room because here's the argument. Well, yes, the Constitution's clear cut that Congress controls it, but it's also clear Congress can delegate, can pass laws, which they did with this 1977 IEPA, this law. So the administration is going to have two arguments. One, they're going to argue that law cannot even be reviewed by the courts. That is an area where the president alone has authority. I think they're going to lose that. I think it's quite clear that the courts do have authority to review it. But then you get into, is it an economic emergency? How much deference do we have to give to the president? I'm certainly no economic expert, but if you read that opinion from the Reagan, Trump, and Obama judges that came out 2 days ago, it's pretty compelling. It's like, this is just not any bad economic circumstance, not any undesirable economic development is an economic emergency. I mean, if you allowed presidents to declare an emergency on the same basis that Trump does, almost any president could declare an emergency at almost any time. That's clearly not what the statute's designed for. It's designed for a full-blown market crash or a full-blown devaluation of currency. It's not just designed for like, we have trade deficits that we'd like to even out.
Yeah, the other thing, too, with his claims of invasion is that it's partly due to the influx of fentanyl in this country. But the statistics show that drug overdoses, fentanyl drug overdoses, are at the lowest level they've been in 5 years.
I would put the fentanyl problem, which is a massive problem, I would never downplay it. I would put that in the category of enormous problems that must be addressed by law enforcement, by the executive branch, by the president, by Congress. Mm-hmm. But to call it an invasion that's just not what the word invasion means.
I think you mentioned the Trade Act of 74. There's also Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. These are all, according to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and others in the administration, these are all Plan Bs that they can go to. So even if we were to lose 100% on the existing case that involves the Alien Enemies Act, it just seems like this thing is going to drag on. He's going to spin. They're going to pull laws from God knows where. It's going to go through the courts forever. Like, where does this ultimately end up? And how, to the original point we were talking about, the key, which is the uncertainty that is driving this economy right now. Are we just headed for, I know you're not an economist, but does it just end up with us in this massive cloud of uncertainty, which has terrific negative impact on the economy?
Well,
ultimately.
uncertainty is certain here. I think we can say that for sure. You're allowed to have a plan B. I mean, the best plan would the best plan B would be to go to Congress, because Congress clearly can pass these things. I don't think that would work politically. And it's okay though, actually, to try to enact a policy through one law, lose, and then say, okay, but I'm going to try to now enact the policy through another law, as long as you haven't run out of time. I'll give you an example. Joe Biden, student loans. He tried to relieve student loans under, I forget, but some law, lost in the Supreme Court, and then said, okay, now I'm going to try it under another law. And then mostly, that was a little more of a split, but he mostly lost that. But I mean, courts don't say, like, you can't forgive student loans or you can't issue tariffs. They say, what the law you've used to do this is not appropriate. But I almost wonder if Trump, and this is a subject of good amount of talk shows out there. Michael Smerconish, who I fill in for on SiriusXM and is a good friend, his poll question of the day is Donald Trump secretly hoping that the courts bail him, get rid of tariffs and bail him out? Because then he'll have the political talking point. If that happens, every economic blip from now till the end of time, he'll go, the courts, they screwed us all over, folks. If they let me do tariffs, this would not have happened. That would not have happened. I will just tell you, the moment that the original ruling came down, striking down the tariffs, a good friend of mine who's a very prominent, very outspoken conservative, I won't out him here, texted me a meme or whatever it is, an image of the house smashing the Wicked Witch of the West, from Wizard of Oz. And then he wrote under it, ding dong, tariffs are dead. So it wouldn't shock me if in his heart of hearts, Trump would be perfectly fine with the courts striking down his tariffs, because then he gets to say, I tried to fight for you, the American worker, but the liberal runaway courts tied my hands. And then again, he can claim for the rest of time, and will claim for the rest of time, oh, tariffs would have fixed that, tariffs would have fixed this, but blame the stupid courts.
I've heard that a lot in the last few days, and I have to say that it's surprising to me that people still think Donald Trump needs something to actually happen in order for him to then say something. I mean, this is a president who is still saying he won the 2020 election. This is a president who claims constantly that he won the youth vote by 37%, though he lost it by 11, actually. I mean,
I heard him say that the other day, and I was like, I don't think I was listening to some remarks, and I was like, I don't think he won. I know his numbers were up with youth, but I don't think he won the youth vote.
No, it's like a 45% swing lie. But does he really need this off ramp that everyone is talking about? He could just go out and say, I won.
Well,
he does that all the time. Does he really need this?
Yeah, it's a good point you make, and it's actually a similar theme that I make in my new New York Magazine piece up today about the battle with Harvard, where I say this is asymmetric warfare. Now, let's first things first. He has lost in the courts, and he will lose in the court. Every one of these cases involving the universities and the law firms, Trump administration is so far outside the law. Here, they're going to lose everywhere they go. I don't care who appointed the judge. They're so far out of line on this. However, I don't think Trump gives a crap. He's picked the fight with Harvard. That's good enough. I said it's like going up to the rich, snooty kid at the bar and sucker punching him. Like, you're in the wrong, but people are still going to be like, that guy had it coming. And look, Harvard's a good foil, right? I mean, he's not picking on Rutgers or Ohio State or University of Tennessee. He's picking on the big, snooty, ridiculously rich, and yes, liberal Harvard. And I don't think he gives a crap if he wins or not. But the downside, of course, I say it's asymmetric because Harvard's going to survive. I'm not saying it's an existential threat, but it's a major threat to Harvard. But more than that, Harvard's going to be okay. If they have to, they'll move some money from column A to column B, whatever. They'll survive. But the students, man, that is a cheap shot. That is hitting below the belt. These international students have no security or confidence whatsoever. I mean, as of the moment, the courts have struck down what Trump's trying to do with international students. So as of the moment, like with tariffs, for now, they can come in, but that could change on a whim. Appeals court could lift a stay. Appeals court could rule differently. And so if you were the parent of some international student, I would have real reservations because they could be mid-semester. It could be October, and a court could rule something or lift something, and all of a sudden, boom, you're out of you're out of a school, you're out of a visa, you're here illegally all of a sudden. Like, it's really risky and dangerous for those kids.
Yeah, and politically, it's a big problem because the public doesn't seem to really understand that this battle with Harvard isn't just a war between Trump and the snooty rich kid at the
Yeah.
bar. It's a battle between Donald Trump and perhaps the medical researchers and scientists and doctors who are going to find the next cancer
Yeah.
treatment that saves your 4-year-old.
And
Like,
I really object to, look, I'll say this, I've said this, I've written this and said this, like as a Jewish person, I really object to this. We're fighting anti-Semitism as the cover story for all this. I called it a
right.
Trojan horse. I mean, I do appreciate real efforts to fight anti-Semitism. I'm involved in that. I've done research. I've done journalism on it. Like, I don't need to make my bona fides here. Like, trust me, every time I go on air, I understand the comments come in. You can imagine what you know what they are,
Hmm.
Andy.
Yep.
But don't bullshit me with, well, we're doing this in the name of anti-Semitism. What does cutting off funding for ALS research and cancer research have to do with fighting anti-Semitism? We're going to audit the entire student body for ideological purity. That has nothing to do with fighting anti-Semitism on campus. We're going to prevent international students, dozens of whom are Israelis, from coming into this country,
Right.
some of whom I believe are IDF veterans. So I reject that. And I reject that, and I resent the effort to use, we're protecting you, Jewish people, which again, I will always accept help and support and allies, but don't use that as a cover for other shit.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to put a punctuation on that by saying, and don't do it at the same time you're accepting a $400 million gift from a government that sponsors Hamas, which
Right.
committed the most brutal, heinous attack on Jews since the Holocaust. There's a little bit of a conflict there, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a few out of the ordinary things, although it's still tied to Trump. The weaponization of the Department of Justice in terms of the investigations into
Yep.
Oprah, Bono, Beyonce, and your boy from New Jersey, the boss,
Oh.
Bruce Springsteen. Is
First
this
of
all
all-
just bullshit and noise, or do any of these investigations have any legs?
First of all, I just want to say, if Bruce Springsteen were ever to be indicted in New Jersey, anywhere, but especially New Jersey, he would be acquitted in 4 seconds. The jury wouldn't even deliberate.
But
They would
that's
just
an
look at each other and go, Judge, we're good. We're good.
That's an interesting question, and maybe
They'd
this
find
is where
some way to indict him in some other state or something.
But this is where the rubber meets the road, I think. We've had 10 years now of Donald Trump and his insanity, and he's corrupted and co-opted every institution, shattered every norm, every boundary. So to me, the billion-dollar question is, could the boss come between Trump and MAGA? Is this the inflection point?
No,
Like, if
no.
you're some Trumper and you love the boss,
No.
are
Listen.
you going to give up Springsteen for this?
Yes.
This guy?
Listen, I know a lot of Springsteen fanatics, religious Springsteen fanatics, and I know a lot of very ardent Trump supporters. The Trump worship runs deeper than the Springsteen worship. Trust me.
Seriously?
Yes. I mean, it's kind of hard to find a lot of overlap, though, if you think about it. Like most people who like get all weepy about Springsteen is like Preet and Jon Stewart and guys like that. They're going to be more liberal. But yeah, I think if push comes to shove, it's going to be. Although now that I'm thinking of Monmouth County, New Jersey, it's pretty red. It's pretty Republican, and that's where Springsteen's from. So I don't know. That's actually a good question. We got to find people who are like, the kind of the people who've been to 38 Springsteen concerts but love Trump, and ask them if you had to choose one. I'm betting on Trump. Look, to your question, I mean, I think a lot of this is just noise, just ridiculousness. Some of it's getting real. I mean, again, I've spoken about Letitia James. We know for sure Letitia James is being investigated. Now, Andy, I've been fiercely critical of Letitia James. I think she wickedly politicized her position. I don't even think. It's not an opinion. I mean, when you run for office explicitly on vote for me and I'll nail this guy for something, she had no idea what. I mean, I went back through the records of her statements are outrageous. And I know a lot of your viewers are liberal. I urge you, reject this. Look, reject what Letitia James did. It's dangerous, it's pernicious, and it leads to worse abuses. But what I say is, look, she's pretty clearly being singled out for retribution. She has some mortgage mortgage documents that have false statements in them. I mean, her lawyer has acknowledged that there were false statements. He argued they were inadvertent or they were immaterial. But like, so it's clear that she started it in a way that liberals should reject. And I think the same thing about Alvin Bragg's prosecution and Fonnie Willis's prosecution, and to a lesser extent, some of the things Jack Smith did. But I've been on with you, Andy. I got drummed out of a lot of liberal circles because I was critical of those cases. I think it's now widely agreed that those cases were off the rails and counterproductive and helped Trump. But what Trump's doing now is not okay either. I mean, Letitia James, look, we need to know a little bit more about the facts. I'm really curious to see how that one comes out. To me, the way I describe the evidence against James as we know it is it's not nothing. It ain't nothing. But I'm also not like overwhelmed by it. To me, it would be a small potato, sort of marginal-ish fraud case. I'm not sure the intent element is there. But, we are starting to see, and this is one of the things I'm watching most closely, like the weaponization committee. Are they going to actually like try to indict Jack Smith? I've been critical of Jack Smith. He didn't do anything remotely criminal. Is some of this bluster going to start translating into investigations? The answer is yes, some. And then even worse, is it going to start translating into actual criminal prosecutions? If that happens, then we've got a major problem.
Yeah. What about Andrew Cuomo? Should he be worried?
I don't know. I think it's really hard to make a criminal case against him because what he did is his office, the governor's office, when he was governor of New York, absolutely submitted false information to Congress. They understated the number of COVID deaths by like 50%. The question is, A, was that intentional, and B, was Cuomo himself part of it? What Cuomo testified is he doesn't believe that he reviewed that report before it went to Congress, although he did put in the old, though I'm not entirely sure, I was the governor, I had 8 million things. It's going to be really hard to make a perjury case. It's really hard where the person has a somewhat plausible claim that maybe he didn't specifically remember. So they're certainly going to dig in and try to make his life miserable. I'm doubtful there will be an indictment, although it's possible. But in both cases, I said Letitia James and Andrew Cuomo, it's going to be really, really hard to convict them, both for political reasons. You're going to have to try them in New York, where they're fairly popular. And also, I just don't think the evidence is all that overwhelming in either of their cases.
Last question. Any thoughts on P. Diddy and Karen Reed?
So Karen Reed, I'm really not following. The Sean Combs case, to me, here's the challenge that I think is there, I guess, for both sides. His conduct is horrible, reprehensible, horrific. And smartly, the defense has not tried to fight that. How could they? He's on video, that horrible video that we've all seen. I don't know, though, that the prosecutors at my former office, the SDNY, have made out the legal elements you need to show a racketeering case or a sex trafficking by force case. He's clearly going to be convicted of some variation of sex trafficking. If I was a prosecutor, I would be worried about that line between horrible conduct in the context of an abusive, at times consensual, at times maybe not consensual relationship versus racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking by force. So if I had to bet, I would bet he gets convicted on the sex trafficking by force, which is the one that carries the real heavy penalty. His conduct is just so gross. I don't think 12 jurors are going to unanimously want to let him off the hook. It wouldn't shock me if he beats the racketeering charge, though. I don't think prosecutors have made listen, I am the number one, maybe this is pot calling the kettle black, because if you talk to anyone who was at the SDNY with me, they will tell you I was like the guy who was pushing the boundaries of RICO, applying it in the broadest, most aggressive possible ways. But this one, to me, feels like a real stretch. I mean, the other members of the RICO enterprise are the sort of mopey, no one else was charged, but, his assistant and these people who were almost like victims themselves and sort of aligned with him and sort of aligned with, it's a soap opera. So, we've got a ways to go in that case. And I think he'll be convicted, but I don't think they'll convict him on the RICO. But if he gets convicted on the sex trafficking by force, that's 15 years minimum and life maximum. So that's all prosecutors need.
Elie, always a blast. Come back again soon.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it. Love talking to you.
Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Lengyel. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.